Story 1, The Last Patron.
Our first story comes from a young woman named Sarah who worked at a multiplex cinema in Portland, Oregon back in 2018. Sarah had been working the closing shift for about 6 months, and she'd gotten used to the routine. The theater would close at midnight on weekdays, and her job was to do a final sweep of all 12 auditoriums, making sure no one was left behind and that everything was clean for the morning crew. Now, if you've never worked in a movie theater, you need to understand something crucial. When those lights come up after a showing, you see everything. The spilled drinks, the scattered popcorn, the forgotten jackets. But more importantly, you see if anyone's still sitting in those seats. It's standard procedure to check every single row, every single seat, because people fall asleep or they hide to try and stay for another movie. Or sometimes they're just so engrossed in their phones they don't realize the film is over. Sarah knew this routine like the back of her hand. Theaters 1 through 12, top to bottom, left to right, every single time. It was a Tuesday night in November. The last showing had been a horror film that ended at 11:47 p.m. Sarah remembered this detail because she'd checked her phone, annoyed that it had run 13 minutes late, which meant she'd be getting home after 1 in the morning. She started her sweep in Theater 12 and worked her way backward. Everything was normal, typical mess, no stragglers. Theater 11, same thing. Theater 10, 9, 8, all clear. When she reached Theater 7, the one where the horror movie had been playing, she noticed something immediately. The theater was pristine. No trash in the aisles, no popcorn on the floor, no cups in the holders. It was as if no one had been there at all. But Sarah had sold tickets to that showing herself. She knew at least 15 people had gone in. She stood at the top of the aisle, letting her eyes adjust to the dim emergency lighting, and that's when she saw him. A man sitting perfectly still in the center seat of the back row. He was wearing what looked like a dark suit, and his hands were folded neatly in his lap. "Sir," Sarah called out, "we're closed. You need to leave now." The man didn't move, didn't turn his head, didn't acknowledge her at all. Sarah felt the first flutter of anxiety in her chest, but she pushed it down. This happened sometimes. People would try to mess with the young staff, thinking it was funny. She walked down the aisle, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. "Sir, I'm serious. I need you to leave or I'll have to call security." As she got closer, she could see him more clearly. His skin looked pale, almost gray in the emergency lighting. His eyes were open, staring straight ahead at the blank screen. When Sarah was about 10 feet away, she stopped. Something felt wrong. The air felt heavier somehow, colder. She could see her breath forming small clouds in front of her face. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked, her voice smaller now, less confident. That's when the man's head turned. Not his body, just his head. It rotated slowly, unnaturally, until he was looking directly at her, and Sarah saw his eyes. They were completely black, not just the pupils, but the entire eye, like someone had filled them with ink. He smiled, a wide, impossible smile that seemed to stretch too far across his face. Sarah ran. She didn't think, didn't question, just turned and sprinted up the aisle, through the door, and into the hallway. She slammed the theater door behind her and stood there, breathing hard, her heart hammering against her ribs. She pulled out her radio with shaking hands. "Mike, I need you at Theater 7, right now." Mike was the assistant manager, a guy in his mid-30s who'd worked there for years. He met her outside the theater 2 minutes later. "What's going on?" he asked. "There's a man in there. He won't leave. There's something wrong with him." Mike sighed, probably thinking it was just another drunk moviegoer. He pushed open the door, and Sarah reluctantly followed him inside. The theater was empty. They walked down to the back row, to the exact seat where Sarah had seen the man. There was nothing there, no indication that anyone had been there at all. "Sarah, there's no one here," Mike said, not unkindly. "I saw him," Sarah insisted. "He was right here. He looked at me." Mike checked the entire theater, even looked under the seats and checked the emergency exits. Nothing. No one. Here's where it gets even stranger. The next morning, Mike reviewed the security footage from Theater 7. He called Sarah into the office and showed her the recording. The footage showed Sarah entering the theater during her sweep. It showed her walking down the aisle. It showed her stopping, staring at the back row, and then running out. But here's the thing that made Sarah's blood run cold. In the entire recording, she was completely alone. The seat she'd been staring at was empty, had been empty the entire time. But Sarah knows what she saw. She remembers the cold, the black eyes, that impossible smile. She quit 2 weeks later and never went back to that theater. And here's the detail that haunts her to this day. When she was reviewing the footage with Mike, she noticed something in the corner of the frame. In the very last row, in the seat where the man had been sitting, there was the faintest outline, a shimmer in the air, like heat rising from pavement. It was only visible for a split second, right before Sarah ran, but it was there. Mike saw it too. He never mentioned it, but Sarah saw his face change when it appeared on the screen. He'd seen it, whatever it was.
Story 2, The Projection Room.
Our second story takes us to a historic theater in Savannah, Georgia, the Paramount Theater, built in 1927, had seen nearly a century of movies, performances, and thousands upon thousands of visitors. By 2019, it had been converted into a modern cinema complex, but they'd kept much of the original architecture, including the old projection rooms. Marcus had just been promoted to head projectionist, which meant he was responsible for the digital systems that had replaced the old film projectors. Most of the original equipment had been removed, but Theater 1, the largest auditorium, still had the original projection room intact. The old projector sat there like a mechanical ghost, too expensive to remove, too much a part of the theater's history to destroy. Marcus's shift ended at 1 a.m. on weekends. After the last showing, he'd do his rounds, shut down all the digital systems, and lock it up. It was a solitary job, but Marcus liked the quiet, liked being alone with the machinery. It was a Saturday night in March when things changed. Marcus had shut down Theaters 2 through 6 and was heading to Theater 1 to finish his rounds.
As he climbed the stairs to the projection room, he heard something that stopped him cold. The old projector was running. He could hear the distinctive whir and clack of the mechanical reel system, a sound he'd only heard in training videos. The machine hadn't been operational in over a decade. Marcus's rational mind tried to find an explanation. Maybe something had come loose. Maybe the digital system was interfering with the old mechanics somehow. But when he opened the projection room door, what he saw defied every rational explanation. The old projector was running at full speed. The reels were turning, the film was threading through the gate, and light was pouring through the lens, projecting onto the screen below. But here's the thing. There was no film on the reels. They were empty. The machine was running, projecting light, but there was nothing there to project. Marcus stood frozen in the doorway. He'd been trained on these old machines, knew them inside and out. What he was seeing was impossible. You can't thread anything through a projector. You can't create light from absence. He took a step closer, and that's when he noticed the screen below. Through the small projection window, he could see Theater 1. The emergency lights were on, casting everything in a dim red glow. But on the screen, there was an image. It was black and white, grainy, like footage from the 1930s. It showed the same theater, Theater 1, but it was full of people. Men in suits and fedoras, women in long dresses. They were sitting in the seats, watching something Marcus couldn't see. Marcus watched, mesmerized and terrified, as the camera angle in the projection panned across the audience. Every face was turned toward the screen, expressions frozen in what looked like horror. Their mouths were open, eyes wide. Some were half standing, as if trying to flee. The image continued to pan until it reached the back of the theater, and Marcus felt his stomach drop. There, standing in the aisle, was a figure, tall, impossibly thin, wearing what looked like an usher's uniform from the 1920s, but its face was wrong, blurred, like someone had smudged a photograph before it could develop. The figure's head turned slowly, looking up toward the projection room, looking directly at the camera, looking directly at Marcus. That's when Marcus heard the voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper that seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly into his mind. "You're late for the showing." The projector's speed increased, the mechanical sounds growing louder, faster, until they became a deafening roar. The image on the screen began to flicker rapidly, and Marcus saw flashes of other scenes, bodies in the aisles, blood on the seats, faces pressed against the screen from the inside, mouths open in silent screams. Marcus did the only thing his terrified mind could think of. He grabbed the power cable and yanked it from the wall. The projector stopped immediately. The sudden silence was deafening. When Marcus looked down at Theater 1, the screen was blank. The emergency lights cast their normal red glow. Everything looked exactly as it should. He left the projection room, locked the door, and went straight to the general manager's office. He filed a report and described everything he'd seen. The manager listened, nodded, and then told Marcus something that made his blood run cold. "You're the third projectionist to report this. The other two quit before finishing their first month." Marcus pressed for more information. The manager reluctantly told him the theater's history. In 1932, there had been an incident. A fire had broken out during a showing in Theater 1. The exits had been chained shut, a common practice back then to prevent people from sneaking in friends. 43 people died. The fire had started in the projection room. The official report said it was an accident, faulty wiring, but there were rumors, whispers, that the projectionist that night, a man named Edward Finch, had locked the doors himself and started the fire deliberately. His body was found in the projection room, sitting in his chair, hands still on the controls of the projector. The coroner said he died from smoke inhalation, but several witnesses reported that his face looked peaceful, almost happy. Marcus continued working at the Paramount for another year, but he never went into that projection room alone again. And on quiet nights, when the theater was closed and he was doing his final rounds, he swore he could sometimes hear it, the distant sound of an old projector running, the whir and clack of reels turning, projecting nothing into the darkness.
Story 3: The Cleaning.
Our final story comes from Denver, Colorado, from a theater that closed down in 2021. The employee, who asked to remain anonymous, worked there for 3 years as part of the closing cleaning crew. For privacy, we'll call her Jessica. Jessica's job was straightforward. After the last movie ended and the building was empty, she and 2 other cleaners would go through every theater, cleaning up trash, wiping down surfaces, and preparing everything for the next day. The work was monotonous but easy, and Jessica appreciated the quiet. She'd put in her earbuds, listen to podcasts, and just go through the motions, theater by theater, row by row. The incident happened on a Thursday night in October 2020. The pandemic had just started easing up, and theaters were beginning to operate at limited capacity again. Jessica's usual partners had called in sick, so she was working alone for the first time. She started in Theater 8, the smallest auditorium, working her way through her checklist. The theater had shown a kids' movie for the last showing, so there was the usual disaster of spilled candy and ground-in popcorn. Jessica was about halfway through, bent down picking up trash between rows G and H, when she heard a child laugh. She pulled out her earbuds and looked around. The theater was empty, the lights fully up. The sound had been clear, close, like a child was standing right next to her. "Hello?" Jessica called out. "Is someone in here?" Nothing, just silence and the hum of the ventilation system. Jessica convinced herself she'd imagined it, maybe a sound from her podcast bleeding through. She put her earbuds back in and continued working. 5 minutes later, she heard it again. This time, multiple children are laughing and talking. Even with her earbuds in, the sound was clear. She ripped them out and spun around. The theater was still empty. But now Jessica noticed something else. In row D, right in the center, one of the seats was folded down. She knew she hadn't folded it down. She'd already cleaned that row, and all the seats had been put up. Jessica walked over and pushed the seat back up. As she did, she felt a rush of cold air, as if someone had opened a door to a freezer. That's when she heard the voice, a child's voice, right behind her, clear as day. "Why did you take my seat?" Jessica spun around so fast she almost fell. There was no one there. But now more seats were folding down. One by one, an entire row of them, like invisible bodies, were sitting down. Row D, row E, row F, the seats were folding down in sequence, accompanied by sounds, the rustle of clothing, the creak of old seats, the whisper of voices.
Jessica backed away, her heart racing, her hands trembling. The sounds were getting louder. Children were talking, laughing, but there was something wrong with it. The laughter was too high-pitched, too mechanical, like a recording played at the wrong speed. Then the screen turned on. Jessica hadn't touched anything, hadn't been near the control panel, but the screen illuminated with a bright white light, and in that light she saw them. Shadows, dozens of them, small, child-sized, sitting in the seats. She could see them projected on the screen, row after row of small, dark silhouettes. Jessica ran. She dropped her cleaning supplies and sprinted out of the theater, through the hallway and into the lobby. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and called her supervisor. "I need you to come here right now," she said. "Something's wrong. Something's really wrong." Her supervisor, a man named Tom, who'd worked at the theater for 15 years, arrived 20 minutes later. Jessica told him everything, expecting him to think she was crazy, expecting him to laugh it off. Instead, Tom's face went pale. "Theater 8?" he asked. Jessica nodded. Tom sat down heavily on one of the lobby benches. "I should have told you. I should have told everyone." And then he told her the story. In 1996, there had been a birthday party in Theater 8, a private showing for a local kid's 10th birthday. 20 children, a few parents. They were watching a cartoon, eating cake, and having fun. Halfway through the movie, a man entered the theater. He wasn't part of the party, wasn't supposed to be there. He'd bought a ticket for a different showing, but he'd wandered into Theater 8 instead. The man was having a psychotic episode. He'd stopped taking his medication weeks before. In his fractured mind, the children weren't real. He thought they were demons, monsters wearing human faces. He had a knife. What happened next was a tragedy that the theater company had worked hard to bury. 3 children died. 5 more were injured. The man was tackled by one of the fathers and later institutionalized. The theater company paid settlements, sealed records, and did everything they could to make the story disappear. They changed the theater number, renovated the space, and tried to erase the memory. But Tom said the staff knew. The ones who'd been there long enough, they all knew about Theater 8. They knew that sometimes, on quiet nights, you could hear children playing. Sometimes the seats moved on their own. Sometimes the screen would turn on, showing nothing but white light and shadows. "We don't clean that theater alone anymore," Tom said. "That's always been the rule. I should have told you. I'm sorry." Jessica never worked another shift alone after that, and she made Tom promise that if anyone else got hired for closing, they'd be told the truth about Theater 8. But here's the thing that still haunts Jessica to this day. Before she ran out of that theater, before she called her supervisor, she saw something on that screen. Among the shadows of the children, there was one different figure, taller, angular, standing in the aisle, and it was moving toward her. Jessica quit 3 months later. The theater closed permanently in 2021, officially due to pandemic-related financial issues. But Jessica knows the real reason. She talked to other former employees. The incidents in Theater 8 had been getting worse, more frequent, more aggressive. On the last day of operation, before the building was locked for good, Jessica drove by. She didn't go in, couldn't bring herself to, but from the parking lot, she swore she could see lights on in Theater 8, flickering, and if she listened carefully, over the sound of traffic and wind, she could hear it. Children laughing.
3 stories, 3 theaters, 3 groups of people who went to work expecting an ordinary night and encountered something that defied explanation. Sarah never figured out who or what she saw in that back row.
Marcus still wonders if the screams he saw on that phantom film were echoes of the past or warnings of something else. And Jessica carries the weight of knowing that some places hold on to their tragedies, playing them over and over like a film stuck on repeat. The question I leave you with tonight is this: how many stories like these exist? How many theaters, how many buildings, how many places hold secrets in their walls? And more importantly, who else is watching when the lights go down? If you enjoyed tonight's journey into darkness, subscribe to Mr. Shadow's Stories for more true horror from the shadows of reality. Hit that notification bell because you never know when the next story will find you. Remember, the shadows are always there, just beyond the light, and sometimes they have stories to tell. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and whatever you do, don't stay after the credits roll.